Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
A couple of historical stories for today. November 9, 3 days ago now, marked the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And of course, today is Veterans Day. So let's do a little bit of discussion about both. On June 8, 2017, President Reagan delivered his, quote, Berlin Wall speech on June 12, 1987. It was in West Berlin at the base of the Brandenburg Gate.
In the 1950s, Khrushchev predicted, "We will bury you." But in the West today, we see a free world that has achieved a level of prosperity and well-being unprecedented in all human history. In the communist world, we see failure, technological backwardness, declining standards of health, and now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I understand the fear of war and the pain of division that afflict this continent, and I pledge to you my country's efforts to help overcome these burdens. To be sure, we in the West must resist Soviet expansion. So we must maintain defenses of unassailable strength. Yet we seek peace, so we must strive to reduce arms on both sides.
So Saturday marked the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that ultimately led to the unification of both West Germany and East Germany under the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. The symbol of the Iron Curtain divided the world into two blocks. You had the free world and the communist bloc. And that was dismantled by a spontaneous act of the people living in East Germany, ruled at that time obviously by a communist regime. But on November 9, 1989, the East German communist regime, facing civil unrest, decided to just simply begin by loosening travel regulations that prohibited travel between East and West Germany, effective on that day, November 9, 1989. That decision was announced at a press conference held on the same day by a spokesman for the Communist Politburo. But due to a miscommunication, the person who was supposed to be the spokesperson was not involved in the discussions, was not involved in the decision-making, and instead he erroneously answered a reporter's question about when the new regulations would take effect. And he said, immediately, right away. That news was broadcast that evening on TV in West Germany and East Germany, and it encouraged the East Germans to rush to the wall and demand the border guards immediately open the gates. The guards were disoriented. They were overwhelmed. They were trying to contact their superiors for instructions, but the crowd, consisting of thousands of people, demanded to be let through, saying, as the Communist Politburo's spokesperson was Günter Schabowski. They were shouting, quote, as Schabowski said, we can. And so after about 3 hours, the guards yielded and let the crowd of East Germans through the gates with very minimal, if no identity check whatsoever. And then after crossing the gates, think of how all of this comes together. After crossing the gates, they were then greeted cheerfully by West Germans who had also gathered on their side of the wall to celebrate. West Berliners then jumped on top of the wall and were immediately joined by East Berlin youth. And of course, people brought, as you've seen in the iconic video footage, some people brought hammers and tools to start chipping off the wall, thus creating several unofficial border crossings. So why was the Berlin Wall built in the first place? It was built on August 13, 1961. It was to prevent the constant flow of refugees trying to escape communism from East Germany into West Berlin. What were they doing that for? Obviously, they were attempting to seek better living conditions and freedom in the Western world. West Berlin was a free world enclave in the middle of a communist-ruled East Germany. And for those who sought asylum in the West, getting through that wall was the easiest way to reach the free world. Berliners on both sides could easily cross the border in Berlin in order to work, shop, visit relatives, and seek entertainment, have fun, do whatever. But in June of 1961, the number of people who fled to West Berlin was approximately 20,000 people. That number increased to 30,000 in July, and it just kept increasing until finally the Soviet Union just began to erect the wall. And the building of the wall, along with stringent regulations on who could cross the border, dramatically reduced the number of those defectors and the number of people who were just, hey, I'm just going across for work and then never coming back. But living in the Eastern Communist bloc made people so desperate that some even risked their lives in order to escape to the other side of the so-called Iron Curtain. Now, you go to history.com, it says that at least 171 people were killed trying to get over, under, or around the Berlin Wall. They write that from 1961 until the wall came down in 1989, more than 5,000 East Germans, including some 600 border guards, managed to cross the border by jumping out of windows adjacent to the wall, climbing over the barbed wire, flying in hot air balloons, crawling through the sewers, and driving through unfortified parts of the wall at high speeds. Andrew Jaworski, a prominent anti-communist opposition leader and one of the founders and former vice president of Solidarity, an independent Polish trade union that led Poland through the overthrow of communism, was actually in West Berlin on November 9, 1989. He knew through analyzing the development of the political situation in Europe and worldwide that the fall of the wall was imminent, and he was able to estimate its date with an accuracy of just a few days. So he went to West Berlin 4 days before the fall of the wall, and he just waited there. During those 4 days, every night, he went together with German oppositionists to the wall. West Berliners were systematically chipping away pieces of the wall even then. So when he got there, it was already chipped to a reinforcement point. He began to chip off pieces of the wall and brought to Poland 2 bags of wall pieces for his friends as souvenirs. I have a little small chip of the wall that I proudly keep on my desk. People in Poland at that time enjoyed acquiring just small pieces of the wall before its complete demolition. But then on the evening of November 9, Gwazda, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce his name, joined a big crowd. They were waiting on the west side of the Berlin Wall in front of the Brandenburg Gate. When the wall crossing was open, he walked with the stream of people through the gate to East Berlin. East Berliners were beside themselves with joy. Here were West Berliners just walking in. It was, after all, families that had not been able to see each other for years, friends, strangers. They were all celebrating. It was a grand fiesta there. He also explained the factors and the sequence of events leading to the actual collapse of the wall, as well as its consequences. So why did the Berlin Wall fall? In 1986, during the Cold War, the General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, Mikhail Gorbachev, that you heard Reagan refer to, rejected Marx's doctrine and established a new system in the Soviet Union called perestroika. It meant to reform the country's inefficient and oppressive economic and political system. The meaning of perestroika is reconstructing or restructuring or transformation. At the same time, Gorbachev also rejected the Brezhnev doctrine of limited sovereignty, which justified the Soviet Union's intervention in the affairs of the Eastern Bloc countries if communist rule or Soviet domination was compromised. It was kind of like a statutory permission to intervene in the affairs of countries of the old Soviet bloc, the Eastern Bloc countries that we refer to. It meant that Poland de facto regained sovereignty, but the implementation of that sovereignty took about 3 years. And the same was true for other Eastern Bloc countries. But it was not until 1989 that the entire bloc actually became independent of direct supervision, direct domination, or direct control by Moscow. It was obvious by then that Germany would ultimately reunite as a result of the system of transformation or perestroika. But communism didn't disappear. And while many people do believe that the fall of the Berlin Wall marked the end of communism, it turns out that communism didn't disappear with the disintegration of the Eastern Bloc countries. Communism was de facto rejected by communists, but communism has gone down in history, but communism remained in the highest positions and continued to manage Poland and the other Eastern Bloc countries. When you think about the history of the Polish Socialist Party, the PPS, it was established in 1892 based on typical Marxist ideology. The only difference between the PPS and other communist or socialist parties was that the PPS advocated national liberation. So when PPS and Western socialist parties turned out to be precursors of communism, that eventually led to the downfall. And shortly after communist rule was established in Poland, the PPS was absorbed by the Communist Party under the Polish United Workers' Party. Now, after the liquidation of communism was announced by Gorbachev through perestroika in 1986, the PPS was reactivated in Poland, and the reactivated PPS obtained a certificate of its continuity from the PPS in exile in London and officially asked Socialist International to unsuspend or wake up the Polish Socialist Party. The PPS was suspended in Socialist International after Poland lost its independence due to World War II. Now, Gwiazda said that Socialist International officially responded to the PPS that the restoration of the PPS within Socialist International was impossible because the spot after former PPS was reserved for the new Social Democratic Party into which Poland's Communist Party will be transformed. And at that time, nobody knew about any plans to dissolve the Polish Communist Party. Then on June 4, 1989, the Polish United Workers' Party lost the first partially free election in Poland. It dissolved entirely in January 1990 on its 11th Congress. Its final first secretary said in his speech at the 11th Congress, quote, "We adopted a resolution to dissolve the party, and today, by saying goodbye to her, I do not think that we put her in the coffin," meaning communism. There's a book called Regulated History, Decomposition of the Communist Dictatorship in Poland from 1988 to 1990. And it was during that break in the Congress session that over 1,100 delegates created a new social democracy of the Republic of Poland that inherited all of the assets of the dissolved Polish Union Workers' Party. A year later, the new party joined the Democratic Left Alliance, which was admitted to Socialist International in 1987 until its withdrawal in 2017. Usually attention is given to the overnight transformation of the Communist Party into the Social Democratic one. But something else was more important. Overnight, with the fall of the wall, thousands of officials, officers, judges, directors, managers, they suddenly became independent officers of the Third Polish Republic. They no longer had the dilemma about who to be loyal to, which of course does not mean most of them have changed their political affinity for communism. All of those factors came together to dissolve the Eastern Bloc countries. When we think about that history on November 9, the culmination of all of those factors coming together, it teaches us that if we actually step back sometimes and we look at all of the disparate things going on around the world today, for example, we look at what's happening in Ecuador and Chile. We watch what is happening in China. We watch what's happening in Iran. We watch what's, to some degree, is happening in Russia, although it's not as distinct as it was back in 1989. We see that there's all of this change going. And at any moment, just any number of those things could simply turn out to be the tipping point for either something really good happening in the world, for a sudden rush of freedom, or just the opposite, a sudden rush of a battle against tyranny. And in short, that's why I think November 9 is a day to celebrate. Because on November 9, all of those factors came together, and we saw, at least temporarily, the destruction of the old Soviet Union. And we saw that communism, once again, always fails. But now I want to switch gears for a second. Because today is Veterans Day, a federal public holiday in the United States, celebrated every year on November 11. It's meant to honor veterans of the U.S. military, which includes anybody who has served, whether they were in combat in a war or not. Veterans Day is not the same as Memorial Day, which people often get confused. Memorial Day is celebrated in May and is meant to honor veterans who died while doing military service. Veterans Day celebrates anybody who has served in the U.S. military, even current living ones. The Congress of the United States requested that the President make annual proclamations of Veterans Day, then called Armistice Days, back in 1926. It was observed before then, but made an official legal holiday on May 13, 1938, with the date of celebration set as the 11th of November every year. Originally, the holiday was to honor only those veterans who had died in battle in any war in which the U.S. had participated, but that was changed after World War II in 1945. A living veteran of that era named Raymond Weeks proposed the idea to the federal government to use Armistice Day to celebrate every veteran, not just those who had died in wars. So he took a delegation to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Eisenhower. And Raymond Weeks was successful in his bid for a change to the scope of the holiday. Raymond Weeks even got to lead the first official celebration of the new version of Veterans Day, this day in 1947. And he continued to lead the celebrations in his home state of Alabama until he died in 1985. But because of that single individual's campaign, he was recognized by President Reagan and Elizabeth Dole as the father of Veterans Day and is still known as such today. The next day to Veterans Day came in 1971 when the Uniform Monday Holiday Act was passed in Congress. And of course, that act, which drives me nuts, All federal holidays, including Veterans Day, were held on Mondays. Veterans Day was held on the last Monday in October from 1971 to 1977, and then back in 1978 it was moved back to its November 11 celebration date. However, the rules for celebrating it were changed slightly so that if Veterans Day is on a weekend day on any given year, the formal celebrations and the day off from work for most federal people and state people, but not a lot of private sector people, that will actually be held on the Monday, which is what we're doing today, although it is November 11. A moment to celebrate all of those who have served to protect and to defend this country. There is one final part, though, of Veterans Day that may confuse some people. And I know it's just me. While it is spelled Veterans '(S) Day in most calendars and special holiday sales and event advertisements, the Department of Veterans Affairs says it is meant to be spelled veterans plural, without the apostrophe, because the apostrophe indicates the possessive, and the holiday is not one that belongs to veterans. Instead, it is a day for honoring all veterans. So just a little bit of tidbit, a little trivial pursuit knowledge there for you. But on this Veterans Day, tied so closely to the fall of the Berlin Wall, what we should do is just take a moment to remember that freedom is fragile, and that freedom is never guaranteed, and that we must always, always be vigilant and guard against the tyranny that would take away our freedom. Enjoy Veterans Day if you have the day off. If you know a veteran, tell them thanks, or just give them that little twinkle in the eye. And also remember November 9. Remember Saturday, and that day when the Berlin Wall came down, proving that freedom ultimately, in the long run, wins over tyranny.